Here's a final notion. It's got to do with consciousness, and that puts also existence within the proper context. And good old Ayn, she said, first of all, she used, I took note of how many times she used the word conscious, consciousness, and conscience in her 577,000 word Atlas Shrugged, okay, her most famous writing, her most famous book. It was a novel, and you can see she used the word consciousness, and this is primarily in John Galt's speech, which she does towards the end of the book, where she kind of synthesizes her philosophy, right, political philosophy, right, and she used the word quite a bit of times. She used it 89 times, 137 times consciousness, 22 times conscience. So she was heavily into consciousness, into what people have in their minds, subjectivism. That which you call your soul or spirit is your consciousness, okay? She's just putting a synonym there, right? Consciousness is the faculty of awareness, the faculty of perceiving that which exists. Again, perception, senses, okay? What's in the mind, not and in the hands, in the sense of touch, not what exists by definition. God does not exist because I think he exists, because I sensed him, because I touched him, or because God came into my mind in a dream or whatever. No, God exists by definition or not. If he meets the definition of exist, he exists by definition. Period. We're done. Okay? And of course that outlaws atheism as well, because the atheists also get into this word belief and disbelief. That's not the way it works in science. Science opposes atheism. Because in science we don't say, well, do I believe in God? Can I prove God? Can I run a test? Can I touch him? Can I see him or hear him? Or was that God who talked to me? No, we don't go into any of that. That's subjectivism. What we say in science, define the word exist. What does exist mean? Physical presence. Object that has location. Does God have location? In your theory, in your explanation, then God exists for the purposes of your theory so that we can understand what you're talking about. That's the way it works in science. We need to be rational in the way we explain a theory to someone else. You have to start, if you're going to do a physical theory, you have to start with the word exist. You got to say, what do you mean by exist? What do you mean by object? An object is that which has shape. If it has location, it also exists. We're done. Now, does your God have shape? Is God a human-like figure, or is God love? Is God intelligence? Because if God is intelligence, he doesn't exist by definition, not because I believe in him or disbelieve in him. Okay? And existence and consciousness constantly put the observer in their subjectivism in every two sentences. And you can see by the number of times you use consciousness, right? Are axioms you cannot escape. These two are the irreducible primaries implied in any action you undertake, in any part of your knowledge. Again, that word knowledge, all subjective. Whether you know the shape of a pebble or the structure of a solar system, the axioms remain the same. That it exists and that you know it. So we have existence related to consciousness and to knowing. Subjective. Yeah, we know that God exists, right? I mean, I know, right? It's my consciousness that tells me that God exists, okay? So we know that God exists, right? I mean, if we follow her prescription, that's what we end up with, okay? And let me show you my comparison here. This is from my book in comparison to hers, right? How many times do I use the word conscious or consciousness? In the entire book, I have half the words in my book, Why God Doesn't Exist. Consciousness 9 times. Consciousness 4 times. Conscious 9 times. And most of those are, I put the breakdown there. 7 are quotes of other people. That's how I used it. I didn't use consciousness to analyze consciousness itself. 2 of them are in with respect to time, again, because time requires memory, a recording device, okay, as we discussed in the past. And 2 of them I talked only in relation to whether plants have consciousness. So, you know, I don't use the word consciousness at all, essentially, okay? And again, I put down there, consciousness introduces subjectivity, biases, and observer into science. That's why we don't use it. We treat anyone introducing the four-letter word consciousness into the dissertation in any way, shape, or form as a Hare Krishna loony. Okay? So please do not bring four-letter words such as consciousness into the discussion. Okay? In any way, shape, or form, we have no use for consciousness. We don't have use for the word knowledge. We don't have use for evidence. We don't have use for any of these words that belong to ordinary speech and which the mathematicians have brought into science and the philosophers have brought into so-called philosophy, which they never defined. And all this comes from good old Aristotle was the guy who began all this mixture, because if you look at his book, especially Metaphysics, he starts out with what exists and he ends up talking about philosophy. And that's what everybody does today. You know, they say, you know, they talk about what exists. Does God exist? And then they go into philosophy, which is religion. You know, political philosophy or religious philosophy. You know, you got all these different notions. In fact, here I got something that puts puts it in the right frame. You get the definition of exist that we have out of the Wikipedia, which is the notion that most people have out there, by the way, okay? And it says existence, the ability of an entity to interact. So we have to see something in motion before you can call it existence. The earth doesn't exist until it interacts, okay? With physical or mental reality. So if something reacts with your mental reality, it exists. And reality, by the way, is a synonym of existence. So they're using a synonym to define existence. But aside from that, you know, what do you mean it interacts with your mental reality? So if I got, you know, cocaine in my bloodstream and I'm, you know, on cloud nine, my mental reality is a little different than yours probably at that point. And if that's the case, what are we saying? We're saying that something is interacting with my mental reality. What can that possibly mean? And if you look up those words, you'll find just synonyms. You know, in philosophy, it refers to the ontological property of being. What is being? Well, being means existence. If you look at these words are all synonyms. So all they do is just use synonyms to define words. Those are circular definitions, or as I like to say, no definition at all. And here's from dictionary.com, exist, to have actual being, to be, to have life, animation, live. Look at being, existing. Look at the verb to be, exist, or to live. So what have we learned? What does exist mean? And because they have these lousy definitions, these, you know, definitions of ordinary speech that everyone uses, we end up, the wiki, okay, ends up with this funny conclusion. And the conclusion goes like this. It says, materialism holds that the only things that exist are matter and energy. Idealism holds that the only things that exist are thoughts and ideas. Scholasticism, existence of a thing is not derived from its essence, but is determined by the creative volition of God. Really love it. And in Eastern philosophy, impermanence describes existence. It refers to the fact that all conditioned things are in a constant state of flux. Okay? So what have we learned about existence today? Have we learned anything from these people? This is after 2,500 years of dealing with existence since the days of Aristotle. You know, here these people talk about existence. Nobody can define the term. Nobody knows what existence means, but everybody knows for a fact whether God exists or not. And see, we have a problem. We had to erase the board completely and start all over. And that includes Ayn Rand. We have to wipe her out completely because she was doing philosophy according to Aristotle, not according to the rational scientific method. Rational scientific method defines these words rigorously and precisely, and we do not allow one iota to move sideways or whatever. Some people were criticizing the other day. They were talking about whether we do experiments in science. Well, if the definition of science is rational explanations, where do you see a provision for the word experiment in there? And people say, well, Bill, but then you're departing from what everybody out there and their mother understands by the word science. Yeah, no kidding. We're telling you that we raised the board completely. And you say, well, that's not going to be very popular. We don't care. We're not here to get subscribers. We're here to give you a difference from what the establishment does, and it's up to you to take it or leave it. I mean, we don't care. We're not going to sacrifice the definitions to get subscribers. So if all the people out there believe or have this notion that you have to do experiments in science, no, experiments are used to prove, to create evidence, to persuade people. We don't do experiments in science. We explain them. Science, we only explain. As long as we stay there, nobody will get hurt. Okay? And we're not going to bend the definition of science to accommodate subscribers and visitors and whatever. No, it's up to you. We tell you what rational science proposes. Whether you believe it, whether you like it or not, that's your personal business. We do not interfere there. That's religion. You've created your own religion.